Hello, everyone, and welcome to Canterbury Shakespeare Festival's Exit Pursued by Bard, our YouTube/podcast series. I'm joined today by Michael Gould, the director of Richard II. Hello, Michael.
Hello, nice to talk to you.
Lovely to speak to you. So, tell us, what have you done in CSF so far, apart from Richard?
Well, I was co-directing or assisting you in the production of Hamlet, which I always thought we were a bit unfortunate with Hamlet because we were rained off on the opening night in the Greyfriars Gardens. I mean, it hadn't rained for weeks on end, and it had been astonishingly hot. And then, just as I was driving there, suddenly it clouded over, and I think after about half an hour we gave up, by which time we were completely soaked. And then, of course, we had to do it indoors, which was a shame.
It was a shame, but we had fairly packed out audiences, so I have fond memories.
Yeah.
You were also in the pantomime that year as well, if I remember rightly.
Oh yes. And I have particularly fond memories of doing the bit in the Canterbury market. I just remember we were just on a little stall, and we didn't have much of an audience, but there were two kids there who were completely enraptured, and they had sort of doting mothers or aunts who kept sort of sending them food along. So they were sort of sitting there with this market food in the seventh heaven, watching this thing that they didn't really know what it was all about, but it was just about grown-ups being very funny and also getting fed rather well. They were completely spellbound. The woman afterwards expressed her great thanks to me, so I just sort of smiled. I could hardly think of anything to say, in fact. Anyway, right.
Oh, I'm terrible at thinking of things to say to people at the end of the show, either as when I'm performing or when I'm saying congratulations. I can never think of the right words. So you joined in 2019? That would be right, wouldn't it? What made you join the festival? What caught your interest?
I think somebody had sent me an email, but actually, I mean, I had heard of the festival in earlier years, and I sort of really rather regretted not having got involved, because in fact, all I could remember was attending the production of Macbeth, which was in the castle in Canterbury.
Oh, you saw that, the infamous Macbeth in the castle that is now falling down.
Well, the castle is falling down,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. As a result of the Scottish play bringing sort of ill luck to it.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Well, it was a very good performance, so I enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad. So why do you think that Shakespeare is important to English literature, English theatre, and what do you like about him and his work?
Shakespeare has never been rivaled. I mean, no one has done this. I mean, this is this astonishing output of plays, and they're all brilliant. And this is some of the finest poetry ever written. Perhaps a bit more sort of diffident about the prose, but certainly it's the finest poetry, and it's the most astonishing output. And he is the bard. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Plays cover the whole range of human experience. I think if you go on this hypothetical desert island, you get off of the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare, which is always there. So you have to think of your third book. I can remember as a child, my parents certainly weren't bookish people, so there were remarkably few books in the house, but one of them was a copy of the complete works of Shakespeare. It was one of these editions which had sort of gold-edged pages and a very sort of posh green cover. I think the print was a bit too small inside to be of much use for serious study, but anyway, it looked good.
Well,
so,
You don't read a complete works of Shakespeare. You have a complete works of Shakespeare. You have the individual texts for actual reading.
Yes, that's true. But I mean, I suppose the first time I heard about Shakespeare, we did have this sort of teacher when I was about 8, 9 years old, who was unusual for a junior school teacher because he wasn't from a teacher's training college. He'd actually had a degree in English literature, and he'd been in the army and was an awful bully and actually the most peculiar man. She won't go into all his peccadillos, but he was very keen on Shakespeare. So I remember he got people acting a bit from Midsummer. He was very keen on class acting, so he got some scenes from Midsummer Night's Dream done, and then we turned to sort of Julius Caesar. I think he got me to be Julius Caesar, so I had to be sort of wander around and sort of getting stabbed and et tu, Brute. And then he got me to play Richard II because he thought that the duel scene in Richard II would make a very good sort of open air production, which we did in the summer. So you can get most of the class involved standing around as courtiers and things. So that was that. Then after that, I don't think the rest of the junior school they took much notice of Shakespeare. But then when I got to senior school, to grammar school, I didn't think the English masters attached much importance to Shakespeare. They didn't seem to get us reading Shakespeare. I mean, there was clearly a school production of Shakespeare. So they would say, we might, before the school production, get told a bit about the plot. But Shakespeare didn't really emerge until, of course, we were in our last 2 years before O-level, when there was a Shakespeare play as part of the O-level. So we did Twelfth Night, which therefore, having studied it for O-level, is still one of the sort of Shakespeare plays I know the best and like the best. It actually is very sort of transparent. It's not a difficult play to follow what's going on. It's that point of view, it's sort of quite easy.
Quite a lot.
Right. Sorry?
Quite a lot of his comedies are quite easy to follow, I think. They tend to be, certainly the famous ones.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm not quite sure whether or not As You Like It gets just a bit so sort of convoluted. We've got the same two people now. What are they doing? What are they doing here? If we've lost all track of any plot at all. I do remember some.
The idea of, I think when people do study Shakespeare at their O-levels or A-levels or GCSEs, you tend to either love the play or absolutely despise it. I remember I studied Much Ado and I think it was Macbeth, and there was only about a handful of us who, at the end of it, still enjoyed reading the play. And most of the rest of the class were like, I hate Shakespeare. I think it's awful. I don't understand why we're studying it.
Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, isn't it? Well, I mean, because for A-level, we did Antony and Cleopatra and The Winter's Tale. Well, I think to this day, I loathe The Winter's Tale because I think it's so stupid. There's this notion that you bring somebody back from the dead 30 years on in this sort of statue form. Unless it's relation actually to certain sort of Greek plays, Alcestis, in which she's brought back from the dead. But I mean, she's brought back from the dead very shortly after she's died, not sort of 30 years later. So I dare say within Winter's Tale, perhaps some of it was a bit more interesting. I mean, perfect. I mean, you also the study of jealousy, which is a sort of theme in Shakespeare, particularly Othello. But we also did Antony and Cleopatra, and that I liked because I mean there is lovely poetry in Antony and Cleopatra. Although although if I were teaching Antony and Cleopatra, I'd actually get much more involved with the sort of historical, with the historical story, and saying that, comparing it with what we know of the history and how Shakespeare has compressed the history. Because I think he derived his plots from North. Is it North who translated Plutarch?
Yeah,
So,
I'm fairly certain he got his Roman stuff from Plutarch, because there's a lot of references. I'm not sure about Antony and Cleopatra, but when we did Julius Caesar, I read a lot of Plutarch, and a lot of the stuff in the Brutus biography, bit in Plutarch is referenced in the play, but wasn't really in any other source materials at the time. So he must
yeah,
have Plutarch, which is interesting if you enjoy Plutarch, which I recommend reading, because I think it's quite fascinating little biographies of people that we don't know that much about.
yeah. And of course, beyond Plutarch, there was his sources for historical plays, which was Holinshed, I think, was the Elizabethan writer of English history. So I mean, it's always said, well, therefore Shakespeare didn't think up his plots. I mean, he just picked up the history books, or picked up the biographies, or found a story, and why not?
Exactly. I would argue, yes. So yeah, exactly. So what? There's he brings so much in the language that the plots, although they are important, the language is what Shakespeare brought to the
Yes.
retelling. There's a reason we're still retelling those same plots today in films and television and on stage, but with different words, as the stories are kind of timeless, and some of them predate Shakespeare, but his language is what makes him important. So I'm going to drill you now. You've got to come up with, what is your favourite play of his?
Oh, that is really is too difficult. Although I do like Richard II, which of course I'm hoping to direct when the time is right. Because it's just, it is for the most part a serious play, and I like the treatment. I sort of see Richard II somehow as almost as if it's all inside his own head.
Mm.
When you put on a Shakespeare play, ideally you have a huge stage, so you've got your colossal cast of extras and courtiers, and you think, well, you can almost do it as you might think properly. But when we're restricted to reality, and even sort of things like acquiring casts, we have to sort of do a bit more on the interpretation. I always like to think of everything in Richard II is somehow, it's entirely inside his own head, and it's the world that shrinks. So from having the whole kingdom at his disposal, he's down into the locked up in the prison. Everything closes in on him, and he is killed. So that's what you're asking for, a favourite Shakespeare play.
If you're going to say second, I will accept that as your answer.
Okay. Yes.
When we send you away to this desert island, we'll give you just Richard II.
Okay. Well, at least I will know it all off by heart.
I often think, what would I do if I was on desert island discs? What would because I'd have the complete works of Shakespeare. So I think I'd take a little model theatre and some pieces, and I could play through all the plays, and that would keep me entertained until eventually I wasted away. Because I know I'm not going to survive. It's a desert island. I'm not getting rescued. So narrowing down that focus a little bit more, do you have a favourite line or quote from any of the plays? It doesn't have to be Richard.
Well, that is difficult because I mean there's so many lines and they're all also good. But I have to sort of chicken out of that one and come out with a line from Twelfth Night where Malvolio says, "'Tis fortune, 'tis all but fortune." That is a cop out. But if I think there is a comment I would like to make about life, is that most of it is a matter of luck. Right? The sort of hands that were dealt somehow in every respect. I mean, too many people think that they have some sort of superior virtue, and that people who are less fortunate in life are there because they're sort of lazy or stupid or something. I mean, this affects the way people think politically, doesn't it? You know, the sort of slight Republican mentality, I think.
Of course, and I think it's an excellent to choose the luck, fortune being what it is, because you're right. A lot of the time, I would say 90-odd% of the time, it is a case of being in the right place at the right time and knowing the right people. So I would.
And indeed realizing when you've got an opportunity and seizing it, or perhaps it passes you because you're not quite sufficiently on the ball.
Oh, I like that.
Shakespeare's general attitudes to life is because, as in Hamlet says, there are more things in heaven and earth, a ratio than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Suggests that Shakespeare had a very sort of good mind for the whole sort of gamut of religion and philosophy. And they were living in these Elizabethan times, they were perhaps more instinctively religious than we are today. I don't know if you've ever heard this. It's like a sort of a joke, which is, it says, how many times is the Bible mentioned in Shakespeare? And despite the fact that there seems to be extensive amounts of things that are sort of like quotes from scripture, it never actually anywhere says the Bible or indeed Holy Writ. So the other half of that joke is that how many times is Shakespeare mentioned in the Bible? And this is the joke about the fact that I think there's a Psalm 46, which supposedly 46 words from the beginning you've got the word shake, and 46 words from the end you've got the word spear. So the sort of myth was put about, or the urban myth was put about, that this was done by the compilers of the King James Bible as a little birthday treat for Shakespeare to put his name in it. But this is actually nonsense.
Oh, that's I was enjoying that. I want you to believe it's true.
Yes. You think I should believe it, but believe it's true? Well, I think the point is that there is an earlier version of the Psalms under which Shakespeare is 46 words from the beginning as Shakespeare is 52 words from the end as spear. So I think it's just coincidence that.
Be careful. You can get that down to 46.
So Shakespeare was 40. What? Shakespeare was born in 1565, wasn't he?
I will take your word for it. I don't know off the top of my head.
So he would have been 46 about the time the King James Bible came out in 1611. I think that's the point. They would always said that the three pillars of the English language. They say, the language of Milton, Shakespeare, and the Bible. That's ignoring the fact the Bible wasn't actually written in Elizabethan or Jacobean English. It was written in Greek and Hebrew, but happens to be That's the time of the translation that we might be most familiar with. Milton seems to be completely forgotten. I mean, do you know much about Paradise Lost?
I read it at school,
Oh,
but not because we weren't studying it. I just read it because I was a nerd at the time, and still am. I think it was I was reading the Dark Materials trilogy, which is quite heavily inspired by Paradise Lost, and I wanted to get the context for it, so I read it, but I haven't. That's got to have been at least 10 years ago, so I don't really remember it.
hmm. I think supposedly there's a whole political interpretation to Paradise Lost, isn't there?
Mm.
Which I don't know. But then, of course, there's Dante's Purgatorio, which I don't know. That was presumably slightly earlier, wasn't it, than Milton?
Yes, I think Milton was inspired by Dante's Inferno in general.
Yes.
I think it was kind of a reaction piece, which I did read that for when I was at, actually that might have been at university, again for wanting to seem clever reasons.
Ah, now whose translation?
I don't remember, but it was quite a modern one.
Yes.
And they did I think Radio 4 did an adaptation of the series, and I seem to remember Toby Jones was Virgil, but I may have made that up.
Yeah.
And that was really good. It was really quite something to listen to that. The language of that as well was really, really quite something.
Well, I knew this Italian woman. She said, of course, really Dante invented the Italian language based on the dialect of Florence, and she said at school, of course, they studied Dante. So quite important to them.
Yeah, I suppose you would, if you were in Italy, you would study Dante. It's like
Yes.
in Portugal, they study Cervantes. Or Spain.
Yes. Well, I'm sure there's a certain amount of Dante's influence on Shakespeare, isn't it? Probably.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of, Shakespeare spent a lot of time talking about hell and heaven I don't know if he makes reference to purgatory, but I can think of several references to hell, heaven, and that whole hog that are kind of less biblically related and more sort of directly influenced by Dante.
Yes.
So yes, let's move on to Richard. What was it about Richard that made you want to direct it for the festival? Richard II, I should say, in case people missed that.
Oh, well, I think I did say that when we had this English, not this English master, this teacher at school who was an English literature graduate, did put on a production of Richard II in which I played the part of Richard II. So that's the interest in the play, because remarkably it's not a play that seems to get put on very much.
No, I've only seen it once, I think, with David Tennant a few years ago at Stratford, although I saw it broadcast, and that was quite good. So I'm going to ask you one last question now, and this is a question that I've been springing on people. If you could play any part of any play from Shakespeare's work on stage, regardless of you being you, so you can inhabit whatever body you want, which part would you play?
That's an astonishingly difficult question to sort of throw out of the blue.
Yeah, but this way we get a nice natural response. I don't want a perfectly curated reason why you want to play Hamlet. I want to know what your knee-jerk reaction is.
I think I'd like to play Titania. I think this line is wonderful. Tell me how these things came to pass. Methought I was enamoured of an arse. I think that's what I like to do it. But if I'm playing with Titania, I think the sort of the bottom would done, and he would have a huge dick with which Titania would be playing as he sort of lies on his lap, and the whole thing would get to the real sort of deep obscenity of the play. I mean, Midsummer Night's Dream is just sort of, we always watch it in sanitized versions, but he's really sort of dark and grim.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah.
Midsummer is often as light and fluffy when it really isn't. It really isn't. Well, that's a good answer. I like that a lot.
It surprised me. I mean, I didn't really want to sort of be Macbeth, but you know, I suppose that would have been my actual first thought, was I wanted to be Macbeth. I thought that was a bit boring.
Well, Titania is a good part as well. Like, she has a lot of stage presence and time, and of the two rulers is probably the more fun one to play. Oberon gets to be big and booming, but he doesn't actually really get to do a lot. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us, Mike. Thank you for those of you watching and listening at home, and we hope to see you again next week.